Hey there, Bremelorians and Seattleites. This episode is a bit of a crossover. Earlier this year, I did an interview on a Seattle-based podcast called Power of Place. If you're here from that show, welcome. Welcome to Bremelore. And if you'd like to check out Power of Place, there's a link in the show notes to the interview that I did with them. The host of the show, Edward, has some ties to Kitsap himself and has a handful of other episodes about places on the peninsula. I really enjoyed episode 33, Digging Gig Harbor, and episode 53, B-Town Bridges. So, while I was there, Edward asked me a question that stumped me. Why is Andy Wood buried in Bremerton? Andy Wood? Who is Andy Wood? I had no idea who he was talking about. Edward explained that Andy Wood was this 90s grunge icon from Bainbridge Island who had died young of an overdose and was mysteriously buried in Bremerton for some reason. I couldn't believe it at first, but it turns out Andy Wood was Kitsap County's secret rock star. Let's take a trip back to the bleak, grimy grunge era of the 90s. Actually, if you attempt to trace grunge back to its starting point, you're going to land in Seattle in the late 80s. And it's going to sound a little different than you might imagine. Seattle wasn't seen as a musical hub then. In fact, in 1985, the mayor banned musical gatherings for under 20s, which helped make Bremerton a music destination for Seattle kids, and led to the infamous punk ferry riot of 1987. But that's a different story. In 1986, two local producers created a compilation album called Deep Six, featuring 6 bands that were rocking the scene: Green River, Melvins, Skinyard, Malfunction, Soundgarden, and the U-Men. These bands established the early grunge scene. The members of these bands were all young people struggling to get by and make music in downtown Seattle. They were living together and working together. They were going to each other's shows and developing friendly rivalries and competitions, relationships with each other. It was a tight-knit community. But if everyone was living in the gray Seattle grunge soup, Andy Wood was the spoon that stirred the pot. You've heard of Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Mudhoney. But these bands might not have existed without Andy Wood's influence. Specifically, they would not have existed without his death. Andrew Wood was the frontman for 2 early grunge bands, Malfunction and Mother Love Bone. He developed a stage persona called Landru the Love God, inspired by Star Trek, which means I instantly love him more. Picture this: a cherubic face with big blue eyes and flowing blonde hair. Now paint it like Gene Simmons from Kiss, and dress him up like David Bowie from the Labyrinth. That's Landru the Love God. No matter the crowd size, Landru came to perform. Kurt Cobain once fell asleep in the front row, and Landru descended to dance around his chair and razz him all night. We think of grunge as dark and gloomy, but Andy straddled musical eras. Coming of age in the big hair 80s, he was inspired by Elton John and Kiss. His first band, Malfunction, was inspired by a Kiss concert that Andy and his brother Kevin attended in 1977, when Andy was just 11. They looked at each other and Gene Simmons and decided they wanted to be rock stars. Andrew taught himself keys on a busted electronic piano and guitar from a second-hand thrift store find. And this is where things get a little darker. To understand why Andy's buried in Bremerton, we need to look at the man behind the Rockstar. So let's rewind again to the 70s. The Vietnam War was ending, Nixon was president, and Seattle was hit hard by the Boeing bust. Timber industries and fishing industries were declining. The unemployment rate was 13 to 14%. So many people left that they put up a billboard saying, "Will the last person out of Seattle please turn out the lights?" Andy Wood was growing up on Bainbridge Island during this time. Bainbridge has always been more connected to Seattle. We usually think of this in terms of prosperity, right? Doctors and lawyers live on Bainbridge Island in their Waterview homes. They commute to Seattle for the big paycheck and all the prestige, and they come home to the smaller, slower island life. But for the first time, this story made me wonder what was coming back from Seattle besides money. In this era, it seems like drugs. In the documentary about Andy's life, he mentions getting into drugs through a Seattle girlfriend who brought the goods across the water. Teenagers would meet in the island woods to party. He got drunk for the first time in 1973 and smoked pot for the first time in 1978. In 1971, a study had come out that revealed a large percentage of soldiers fighting in Vietnam were getting addicted to opioid drugs locally available in Asia. Those soldiers came home with drug addictions and deep PTSD. Where there's demand, there's soon to be supply. And the quickest way to get things from Asia into the United States is through Seattle. In 1977, Bainbridge Island launched an early drug education program called Here's Looking at You. This program spans years, a whole school career for some children. Andy was already in school when it began, so he got about 7 years of it. But it didn't stop him. In 1989, this program was deemed a failure. Students openly told reporters that drug use was rampant, with 70% using drugs or alcohol weekly. Students were quoted saying things like, "Drugs are as plentiful as potato chips," and in Bainbridge Island, students study hard and party hard. After high school, Andy moved to Seattle to chase his Rockstar dream, right in the middle of the crack epidemic. By 1987, he'd tried every drug and was into coke and heroin. His family put him into rehab. For a while, things looked up. Andy formed Mother Love Bone, his most successful band yet. He found a sober roommate and good friend in Chris Cornell. They started making music together in their tiny apartment. And he fell in love with a girl. In 1988, Mother Love Bone signed with a major label and released the EP Shine. In 1989, they recorded a full album and they were preparing to tour. But Andy fell off the wagon and returned to rehab. After the second stint in rehab, Andy had a fatal relapse in 1990. His fiancée found him unconscious and called 911. He was comatose for 3 days before passing away on March 19th, 1990, to the sounds of his favorite Queen album, A Night at the Opera, surrounded by his friends and family. Memorial services were held in the Pine Theater in Seattle. It was a full house. Mother Love Bone's first full album was released 4 months later, to great reviews, but it failed to chart without the frontman to promote it. What it did do was spark a new era of sound. Grunge. Mother Love Bone was left in legal limbo without their leader. Chris Cornell had written some songs about Andy and his grief, and reached out to the remaining members to form a band in tribute to Andy. Temple of the Dog was formed. They released one album in 1991. After that, most of the band went on to become Pearl Jam. Alice in Chains dedicated their debut album to Andy Wood. In 2015, Pearl Jam discovered that Andy's mom, Toni, was barely getting by, living in a leaky trailer on Bainbridge Island. The band crowdfunded to buy her a new home. In 2016, the Temple of the Dog reunited to celebrate the 25-year anniversary of their album. It's the only tour they ever went on. It was lauded by fans as the best live show that has ever been seen. And the tour featured not just the songs written about Andy, but also covers of Mother Love Bone songs. It was truly a tribute to Andy. Chris Cornell had many years of musical success, but he had his own struggles with substance abuse, and he would ultimately take his own life in 2017, just a year after the tour. Alright, so now that we know who Andy Wood was and how he died, can we answer the original question? No, not really. We've got the childhood on the island, but there must be something I'm missing here. Hold on, it's time to get hyperlocal. Someone get me the Kitsap Sun. Alright, here's something. On June 12th of 1960, Toni Dahlberg married David Wood, both attendees of West High in Bremerton. The wedding was held at the Lutheran Church at 11th and Veneta. You might know it now for its Seahawks-themed paint scheme. But in 1960, we're talking traditional. This is in the social pages, so the wedding is described in all of its glory. Aunties serving tea, bridesmaids carrying pink rosebuds, the bride in silk and lace and pearls. This was Andrew Wood's parents' wedding, 6 years before he's born. His dad joined the Air Force. They traveled where he was stationed, and then when David went to Vietnam, Toni brought their young family back to Bremerton. After the war, David came home and built them a house on Bainbridge Island with his own hands. I wish I could say that this love story had a happy ending, but instead, it has a common one. A couple who married young, a husband who served in Vietnam. There were anger issues and substance abuse problems at home. Divorce came along in 1982 when Andy was in high school. Andy and his mom stayed on the island. David likely returned to Bremerton. While I don't have a definitive answer, I think this is enough to make an informed guess. Bainbridge Island cemeteries tend to be smaller and limited to folks with deep island ties. As island transplants with roots in Bremerton, It was probably easier and cheaper to bring Andy back to Bremerton for burial, where all of the family roots were. Sometimes the most mysterious questions have the most human answers. If you'd like to know more about Andy Wood, I highly recommend the documentary about his life called Malfunction, the Andrew Wood Story. I listened to a lot of Malfunction and Mother Love Bone while researching this episode, but the place where Landru the Love God really comes to life is on the stage. And the best place to see it is in that documentary. And if you would like to visit Andrew Wood, he is buried in the Big Hillside Cemetery on Kitsap Way, Miller Woodlawn Memorial Park. Go up the stairs to the mausoleum and head to the Rose section. He's there, along with his dad.
Do you have a question about Bremerton or its history? I want to hear it. You can find the show on social media at Bremelore, or visit the website www.bremelore.wtf. That's right, you heard me. Bremelore.whiskey tango foxtrot to leave me a voice message. I can't wait to hear from you.